Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Jennifer Nakamura's flashlight beam passed through the figure standing 20 feet ahead, passed through it like smoke, like nothing, and illuminated the moss-covered spruce behind where something that looked human but wasn't, should have cast a shadow but didn't. She blinked. The figure remained, darker than the surrounding darkness, a void cut into the fabric of the forest night. Her hand found the radio on her belt, fingers fumbling with the clip. 6 months as a ranger and every protocol she'd memorized felt suddenly useless. What do you report? What words describe something that violates basic physics? Hello? Her voice sounded thin in the dense air of the Hoh rainforest, swallowed by moss and moisture before traveling more than a few feet. Park Service, identify yourself. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, humanoid in outline, but somehow wrong in every detail her mind tried to process. Too tall, maybe. Or the proportions off in ways her eyes couldn't quite focus on. Like trying to look directly at something visible only in peripheral vision. Jennifer's training said approach cautiously, maintain verbal contact, assess for medical emergency or threat. But 6 months of training weighed nothing against instinct that screamed to run, to put distance between herself and this thing that her flashlight couldn't properly illuminate. She was supposed to be checking the Hoh River Trail for vandalism, reports of spray paint on the historical markers, probably teenagers from Forks making the drive out for kicks. Simple first patrol solo night shift for the new ranger. Prove she could handle basic duties without supervision. Build confidence. Instead, she'd found this. Jennifer took one step forward, then another, her boots making soft sounds on the perpetually damp earth. The figure remained motionless. Her flashlight beam continued to pass through it, revealing details of the forest behind. The massive Sitka spruce trunk, nurse logs thick with ferns, the endless curtain of moss that hung from every branch. At 10 feet distance, she could see that the figure had no face. Not obscured or hidden, simply absent. Where features should be, there was only that absolute darkness, like a hole cut into reality itself. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't a person. Wasn't anything natural. Dispatch, this is Nakamura. She keyed her radio without taking her eyes off the figure. I'm at mile marker 2 on Hoh River Trail. I'm observing. What? What was she observing? Requesting backup. Over. Static answered. She tried again, got the same white noise. The radio was working yesterday, new batteries installed last week. But here, now, in the presence of this thing, technology failed. As if the normal rules had been suspended. Jennifer's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 26 years old, fresh out of seasonal work at Mount Rainier, still learning Olympics trail systems. This was supposed to be the easy park, temperate, well-maintained, popular with tourists who rarely ventured beyond the main paths. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that required the kind of experience she didn't have. The figure moved. Not walking, shifting, as if distance meant something different to it. One moment 10 feet away, the next close enough that Jennifer could have touched it if she'd been insane enough to try. She stumbled backward, her flashlight wavering. In the jerky movement of the beam, she caught a glimpse of others. More figures, scattered through the forest, standing among the trees like they'd always been there and she'd simply failed to notice. 4. 6. Maybe more in the darkness beyond her light's reach. All the same, tall, featureless, absolutely silent. All watching her with senses she couldn't identify because they had no eyes, no faces. Nothing but that void-like darkness. Jennifer ran. Protocol be damned, training be damned. Pure animal terror drove her back down the trail, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly across moss and ferns and ancient trees. Her breath came in sharp gasps, the humid air thick in her lungs. Behind her, or maybe beside her, maybe ahead, she sensed movement. Those figures keeping pace. observing, following. She burst out of the tree line into the small parking area where she'd left the Park Service truck. Her keys were in her hand before she consciously remembered reaching for them. The truck's headlights blazed to life, illuminating a circle of normalcy. Gravel and signage and her own reflection in the rearview mirror, wide-eyed and terrified. The figures stood at the edge of the light. 6 of them now, maybe 8, arranged in a loose semicircle. Watching. The headlights passed through them the same way her flashlight had, revealing nothing, explaining nothing. Jennifer locked the doors, knowing it was pointless. If those things could ignore physics enough to have no shadow, locks wouldn't stop them. But the mechanical click of the door mechanism provided a tiny thread of normalcy to cling to. Her radio crackled. Akamura, respond. Jennifer, what's your status? Over. Sarah Chen, the senior ranger on duty tonight. Jennifer grabbed the radio. Sarah, I'm at Ho River Trailhead. There's something out here, multiple somethings. I don't know what they are. Over. Silence. Then, Jennifer, are you injured? Do you need medical? Over. No, I'm not injured. But there are figures. People, except they're not people. They don't have shadows, Sarah. The light goes through them. Over. Another pause, longer this time. Jennifer could imagine Sarah's expression, concern mixed with doubt. The new ranger was reporting impossible things on her first solo night shift. Classic stress response, maybe. Exhaustion. Overactive imagination. Jennifer, I need you to take a breath. Are you in a secure location? Over. I'm in the truck, engine running. But they're out there, standing at the edge of the lights. Over. Okay. I'm sending Tom to your location. ETA 30 minutes. Can you stay in the vehicle until he arrives? Over. Jennifer looked at the figures. They hadn't moved closer, hadn't approached the light's edge. But there were more now. 10, 12. Multiplying in the darkness like they'd always been there, just waiting to be noticed. Copy that. I'll wait. Over. She kept the engine running, kept the headlights on. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. 6 months of training and none of it covered this. Search and rescue, first aid, conflict de-escalation, wilderness survival. Nothing about entities that violated fundamental laws of physics. The figures remained at the light's edge, unmoving. Jennifer watched them, unable to look away. Her mind tried to categorize, explain. Maybe they were some trick of the light, atmospheric conditions in the rainforest creating optical illusions. The Ho was known for its unique ecosystem. Maybe some bioluminescent fungus, some natural phenomenon she didn't understand. But no natural phenomenon made her skin crawl like this. No trick of light created that sense of being watched by something that saw without eyes, that existed in defiance of basic reality. 26 minutes by the dashboard clock. Then headlights appeared on the access road, Tom's truck pulling into the lot. He parked beside her, got out looking calm and professional, flashlight in hand. Jennifer opened her door. You okay? Tom was 40-something, weathered face and steady demeanor. 15 years at Olympic. He'd seen everything the park could throw at rangers. I saw something. Jennifer pointed toward the tree line. Multiple figures. They were standing right there. No shadows, no faces. The light passed through them. Tom shined his flashlight where she indicated. Trees, moss, ferns, empty forest. I don't see anything now. They were there. I'm not imagining this. I believe you saw something. His tone was careful, not quite patronizing, but close. The rainforest at night can play tricks, the moisture in the air, the way light refracts. I've had my share of weird sightings that turned out to be. These weren't tricks, these weren't reflections or shadows or tree stumps. They were entities, and they were watching me. Tom studied her face for a moment. Why don't you head back to the station, get some coffee, write up a report. I'll do a sweep of the trail, check for any signs of vandalism or trespassers. You shouldn't go in there alone. I'll be fine. Radio's working now, right? He keyed his own radio, Got clear response from dispatch. See? Whatever interference you had, it's cleared up. I'll be 15 minutes, tops. Jennifer wanted to argue, to insist that he take this seriously, but she was the rookie, the new hire who just reported seeing impossible things. Her credibility was already damaged. Pushing harder would only make it worse. Be careful, she said finally. Tom smiled. The expression meant to be reassuring. Always am. Meet you back at the station. He walked toward the trail, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Jennifer watched until he disappeared into the tree line, then sat in her truck and waited. The figures were gone. The forest looked normal, dense, wet, perpetually dark under the canopy, but normal. Maybe Tom was right. Maybe she'd seen something ordinary and her mind, stressed by first solo shift, had transformed it into something threatening. Pattern recognition gone haywire, shadows and moisture creating illusions. She'd read about it in training, how the human brain, evolved to spot predators, sometimes saw threats where none existed. Her radio remained silent. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Jennifer tried calling Tom, got no response. Tried dispatch, got Sarah's worried voice. Jennifer, have you heard from Tom? He's not responding. Over. Cold settled into Jennifer's stomach. He went up Ho River Trail about 20 minutes ago. Said he'd do a quick sweep. Over. Keep trying to raise him. I'm rolling back up. Stay in your vehicle. Over. Jennifer tried Tom's radio every minute for the next 10. Nothing but static. She stared at the trail entrance, willing him to emerge safe and annoyed at the concern. But the darkness between the trees remained empty. Sarah arrived with Ben Kowalski, another experienced ranger. They conferred briefly, then both headed up the trail with high-powered flashlights and radios. Jennifer sat in her truck, feeling useless and terrified. This was her fault. She'd sent Tom into danger because she couldn't articulate the threat, couldn't make him understand. 30 minutes later, Sarah and Ben returned. Without Tom. Found his flashlight, Ben said, his face grim. Mile marker 3. Still on, just lying on the trail. No sign of struggle, no blood, no footprints off the path. It's like he just stopped existing. Sarah looked at Jennifer. Tell me exactly what you saw. Every detail. So Jennifer did. The figures without shadows, without faces, the way they multiplied in darkness, the sense of being watched by something that existed in violation of physics. She expected skepticism, dismissal. Instead, Sarah's expression grew troubled. How many were there, when you last saw them? Maybe 12, maybe more. Why? Sarah exchanged a glance with Ben. There's been talk. Local Quileute legends about shadow beings in the deep forest. Things that exist between light and dark. The elders won't enter certain parts of the Ho after sunset. But I thought... She trailed off. You thought they were just stories, Jennifer finished. Yeah. Ben keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Kowalski. We have a missing ranger at Ho River Trail. Need full SAR activation and... He paused. And contact whoever knows about the old warnings. The Quileute Council. We need information. The next 6 hours were chaos. Search and rescue teams arriving, dogs tracking Tom's scent to marker 3, then losing it completely, as if he'd vanished mid-step. Helicopters at first light, finding nothing. State police involvement, questions Jennifer couldn't answer with any credibility. And through it all, the nagging awareness that the figures were still out there. Watching. Waiting. By dawn, Jennifer was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline. She sat in the ranger station filing room, trying to write a coherent report that wouldn't sound completely insane. The facts were simple. She'd seen anomalous figures, reported them. Tom had investigated and disappeared. But the implications, that something impossible had taken an experienced ranger, those were harder to put into official documentation. Sarah entered with an elderly Quileute man, his face weathered and serious. Jennifer, this is James Black. He's agreed to talk to us about what you saw. James sat down carefully, studying Jennifer with sharp eyes. My grandfather told me about them. The shadow people. Said they've always been in the deep forest, in the places where the canopy is so thick that day and night mean nothing. They exist in the space between, neither living nor dead, neither present nor absent. They watch, and sometimes they take. Take? Jennifer's voice was hoarse from too much coffee and not enough sleep. Take people where? We don't know. Gone means gone. My grandfather said they're drawn to people who are lost. Not just physically, but spiritually. People who don't know their place, who stand between worlds themselves. He looked at Jennifer meaningfully. You're new to this forest, new to these lands. Neither tourist nor native, neither experienced nor ignorant. Between. Jennifer felt cold despite the warm morning. Tom wasn't between anything. He was a 15-year veteran, but he went into their territory at night following you. Following someone who had seen them and survived the first encounter. That made him interesting, made him prey. So what do we do? How do we find him? James was quiet for a long moment. You don't. Once the shadow people take someone, they're not in our world anymore. Not fully. Maybe they exist in some space adjacent to reality. Maybe they're just gone. Either way, searching won't help. It will only attract more attention. That's not acceptable. Sarah's voice was hard. We don't abandon rangers. We don't give up based on ghost stories. These aren't stories. James stood slowly. They're warnings. Warnings that your people have ignored for 150 years. You build your trails and your visitor centers, map the forest like you own it. But there are places that don't belong to anyone. Places that exist outside your maps and rules. The shadow people guard those places. And anyone who intrudes. He didn't finish the sentence. After he left, Sarah turned to Jennifer. I'm pulling you off active duty pending investigation. Standard procedure for any incident involving missing personnel. Go home, get some rest. We'll figure this out. But Jennifer couldn't rest. Couldn't stop seeing those featureless figures, couldn't stop remembering the way they'd multiplied in darkness. And somewhere in her mind, a terrible question grew. If the shadow people took Tom because he'd followed her, was she responsible? Had her inexperience, her panic, marked him as prey? She drove home to the small cabin she rented in Forks, 15 miles from the park. Slept fitfully for a few hours, waking repeatedly with the sense that something was watching. When she finally gave up on sleep around noon, she made coffee and pulled out every book she could find about Olympic National Park's history, about local legends, about disappearances in the wilderness. There were more than she'd expected. Going back decades, even centuries. People who'd entered the forest and simply vanished, leaving no trace. Most were explained as getting lost, falling into ravines, succumbing to exposure. But the pattern was there if you looked. Disappearances clustered in certain areas, particularly in the Hoh rainforest. And many of the missing were experienced hikers, rangers, people who knew the terrain. People like Tom. Jennifer's phone rang. Sarah. We found something. Camera trap on the Hoh River Trail installed last month to monitor elk. The footage from last night. She paused. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, Jennifer was back at the station, watching grainy infrared footage on Sarah's computer. The timestamp showed 02:17, about 15 minutes after Tom had entered the trail. The camera's field of view captured a section of path near marker 3. Tom appeared, walking steadily, flashlight beam visible as a bright spot in the infrared. He stopped, seemed to look at something off camera. Then his posture changed, stiffening, flashlight dropping slightly. He stood completely still for nearly 30 seconds. Then the figures appeared. Dark spots against the already dark forest, visible only because they seemed to absorb even the infrared light. They surrounded Tom, moving without walking, closing in from all directions. He didn't run, didn't fight, just stood there as they converged. When they touched him, if touching was even the right word, Tom began to fade, not falling, not being dragged away, simply becoming less solid, less present, as if he was being erased from reality frame by frame. In less than 10 seconds, he was gone. The figures remained for a moment longer, then dispersed into the forest. The footage ended. Sarah replayed it 3 times without speaking. Finally, "What the hell are we dealing with?" Jennifer had no answer. The evidence was there, objective, recorded, undeniable. Something impossible existed in the Hoh rainforest. Something that could take people out of reality itself. "We need to close the park," Jennifer said. "At least the Hoh River area. We can't let people go in there." "On what grounds? How do I explain this to the superintendent? To the public?" "Sorry, no hiking. There are beings that violate physics living in the forest." "Tell them there's been an incident. Dangerous wildlife, unstable terrain. Make something up." Sarah rubbed her face, exhausted. "I'll try. But you know how this works. The Park Service lives on visitor revenue. Closing a major attraction without concrete evidence of specific danger, they'll resist." She was right, Jennifer knew. The bureaucracy would demand explanations, documentation, risk assessments, and how do you quantify the risk of shadow people? How do you prove a threat that exists outside normal reality? Over the next 3 days, Jennifer became obsessed. She read everything about shadow people, not just local legends but reports from around the world. The phenomenon was documented across cultures. Dark figures glimpsed in peripheral vision, silhouettes without source, presences felt but not seen. Usually harmless, usually fleeting. But sometimes in certain places under certain conditions they were dangerous. The Hoh rainforest, with its perpetual darkness under the dense canopy, its unique ecosystem isolated from the outside world, seemed to be one of those places. A thin spot, where the barriers between reality and whatever lay beyond were weaker. Jennifer tried to return to normal duties, paperwork, trail maintenance planning, public education programs, but every task felt hollow, meaningless. Tom was still missing, and she was one of the few people who knew the truth about why, one of the few who'd seen the shadow people and survived the encounter. Why had they let her go? That question haunted her. They'd taken Tom, but not her, even though she'd been closer, had seen them first. James Black's words echoed. They're drawn to people who are lost, who don't know their place. Was that her? Caught between her Asian heritage and American upbringing, between her dreams of wilderness protection and the harsh reality of bureaucracy, between her desire to be a competent ranger and the truth of her inexperience, between. A week after Tom's disappearance, Sarah called Jennifer into her office. The superintendent is coming tomorrow, wants a full briefing on the incident. They've reviewed the camera footage and... She hesitated. They're calling it equipment malfunction. Artifacts in the infrared sensor. They don't believe what we saw was real. That's insane. Tom is still missing. And officially he got lost, succumbed to exposure or injury. We're continuing the search, but... Sarah's expression was bleak. They want to reopen the Hoh River Trail next week. Can't afford to keep it closed any longer without concrete evidence of danger. Jennifer felt sick. People will die. Maybe. Or maybe the shadow people were a one-time phenomenon. Atmospheric conditions, some weird combination of factors that won't repeat. We don't know enough to make predictions. We know Tom went into that forest and was erased from reality. That should be enough. But it wasn't. Jennifer learned that over the following days as the Park Service machine ground forward, prioritizing visitor access over inexplicable dangers. The trail reopened. Tourists returned, hiking through the exact area where Tom had vanished, oblivious to the threat that might still lurk in the darkness beneath the canopy. Jennifer was reassigned to visitor center duty, desk work, answering questions about trail conditions and wildlife sightings, selling park maps and guidebooks. Safe. Useless. Every hiker who headed toward the Hoh River Trail filled her with dread, but she couldn't warn them, couldn't say, "Don't go there at night. Shadow people that exist outside reality might erase you from existence." She'd sound insane. Would lose her job. And for what? Based on one incident? One encounter? Maybe the superintendent was right. Maybe it had been atmospheric conditions, some unique convergence that wouldn't repeat. Maybe Tom had simply gotten lost, despite his experience, and the camera footage was corrupted data interpreted by pattern-seeking minds, desperate for explanation. But Jennifer didn't believe that. Couldn't believe it. She'd seen those figures, felt their wrongness, watched Tom vanish into nothing on infrared camera. The shadow people were real, and they were still out there. 3 weeks after Tom's disappearance, a young couple failed to return from the Hoh River Trail. Search parties found their backpacks at mile marker 3, the same location where Tom's flashlight had been found. No signs of struggle, no indication of where they'd gone. Just abandoned equipment and empty forest. Sarah looked at Jennifer with haunted eyes. It's happening again. Jennifer made a decision. That night she loaded her pack with every piece of equipment she could carry. Flashlights, flares, GPS, radio, first aid kit. She drove to the Hoh River trailhead and parked in the same spot where she'd first encountered the shadow people. The sun was setting, darkness gathering beneath the ancient trees. She wasn't trained for this. Wasn't experienced enough, wasn't wise enough. But she was the one who'd seen them and survived. Maybe that meant something. Maybe she could find the missing couple before they were taken completely. Maybe she could understand what the shadow people wanted, find a way to negotiate or appease or stop them. Or maybe she'd just disappear like Tom, like the couple. Another mystery for the Park Service to explain away as getting lost. Jennifer shouldered her pack and walked into the forest. The trail was familiar now, every marker known. She moved with her flashlight off, letting her eyes adjust to the perpetual twilight beneath the canopy. The rainforest was never truly dark. Even at night, bioluminescent fungi provided faint illumination, enough to see by once you adapted. At mile marker 3, she stopped. "I know you're here," she said to the darkness. "I know you're watching. I'm not running this time." Silence, just the soft drip of moisture from moss-covered branches, the distant sound of the Hoh River. Jennifer waited, her heart steady despite the fear. This was insane. This was beyond anything she was trained for. But Tom deserved better than being erased and forgotten. The missing couple deserved a chance. Movement in her peripheral vision. Jennifer forced herself not to turn, not to look directly. The shadow people existed in the space between seen and unseen. Looking at them directly made them less real, not more. She kept her gaze forward, aware of figures gathering around her. "Where did you take them?" she asked. "Tom and the others. Where do they go?" No response. But the sense of presence intensified, pressure building in the air like before a storm. Jennifer's skin prickled, every instinct screaming to run. She held her ground. "James Black said you guard places between worlds. I'm between two, never quite fitting anywhere, never quite belonging. Maybe that's why you let me go before. Because I'm like you?" Still no answer. But the figures were closer now, visible in peripheral vision as voids in the darkness. 7, 8 of them, arranged in a circle around her. Jennifer felt the same paralysis that must have gripped Tom, a weight pressing down on her will, making movement difficult. "Take me instead," she said. "Let the others go, and take me. I'm the one who brought this attention. I'm the one who violated your space." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, impossibly, one of the figures spoke. Not with a voice, with a sensation, a knowing that appeared directly in Jennifer's mind without passing through her ears. "You do not understand. We do not take. We reveal. Your kind exists, thinking your reality is all that is. We show what lies beneath, what has always been there. Some see and return. Some see and choose to stay. Your Tom chose. The others chose. We did not take. They accepted the truth." "What truth?" Jennifer whispered. "That the world you think is solid is nothing. Shadow and light the same. Present and absent the same. You cling to flesh and form because you fear dissolution. But dissolution is not death. It is recognition of what you always were, temporary, permeable, already more absent than present. The words, thoughts, concepts echoed in Jennifer's mind, stirring vertigo. The world around her seemed less solid suddenly. The trees more like suggestions than objects, the ground beneath her feet uncertain. I don't want that truth. I want to find the missing people. They are not missing. They are here. They have always been here. Look without looking. See without seeing. Jennifer let her vision unfocus, stopped trying to perceive in the normal way. And there, in that space between attention and inattention, she saw them. Tom standing among the trees, expression peaceful. The young couple nearby holding hands looking at something Jennifer couldn't quite perceive. Others too, figures that might have been missing hikers from years past, all existing in that liminal space between present and absent. They looked content, not trapped, not suffering, just elsewhere. Still in the forest but perceiving it from a different angle, existing in relation to reality rather than within it. Are they dead? Jennifer asked. Dead is your word for absent, but they are not absent. They are here, now, always. You simply lack the perception to see them most of the time. We help them see, help them step into the space between what is and what is not. Jennifer's rational mind rejected this, insisted on concrete categories, alive or dead, present or gone. But standing here, surrounded by shadow people, seeing the missing rangers existing in that impossible space, she couldn't deny what her eyes and mind were experiencing. Can they come back? Return to normal reality? If they choose. If they remember how to be solid, how to be present rather than absent. Most do not choose. Most find your solid world loud and heavy after seeing beyond it. I choose, a voice said. Jennifer turned to see Tom stepping forward, his form seeming to thicken, become more opaque. I choose to come back. The shadow people didn't prevent him. Tom walked toward Jennifer, each step making him more real, more present. By the time he reached her, he looked solid, human, alive. But his eyes held something different, a knowledge, an awareness that hadn't been there before. Jennifer, he said, it's okay. I wasn't taken. I was shown. Shown what? That everything we think matters doesn't. That reality is negotiable, permeable. That we're already ghosts, Jennifer. Already shadows. We just don't see it most of the time. He looked back at the young couple, still holding hands in that impossible space. They chose to stay. It's their right. But I have a wife, kids. I need to try being solid again, even if it's just temporary. Even if I know now that it's all illusion. The shadow people remained motionless, watching. Jennifer understood now. They weren't predators. They were revealers, showing humans what lay beneath the surface of assumed reality. Some people, shown that truth, chose to remain in that liminal space. Others, like Tom, chose to return to the comfortable fiction of solid existence. What about me? Jennifer asked the shadow people. Why did you show me this? You are between. You have always been between. We recognized you, showed you truth because you might understand, might help others understand. This forest is a thin place. Barrier between what your kind thinks is real and what actually is grows weak here. More will see us. More will choose. You can help them understand they are choosing, not being taken. Jennifer felt the weight of that responsibility, to be a bridge between normal reality and this impossible truth. To help people understand that what they perceived as abduction might be revelation, that the missing might not be lost but transformed. It was too much. She was 26, 6 months into her first real ranger position. This was beyond her training, beyond her capacity. But standing here, surrounded by shadow people and those who'd chosen to exist between states, she understood that she'd been chosen for this, whether she wanted it or not. Okay, she said quietly. I'll try. I'll help people understand. Tom put a hand on her shoulder. Let's go back. Together. Slowly. Remember how to be solid. They walked down the trail together, each step a reminder of weight and form and presence. The shadow people watched but didn't follow. Behind them, the young couple remained in that liminal space, choosing their own truth. By the time they reached the parking area, Jennifer felt heavy, exhausted, as if putting on flesh again was physical labor. Tom looked the same, weary but determined. They sat in Jennifer's truck for a long moment without speaking. "No one will believe this," Jennifer said finally. "No, but we'll know, and maybe that's enough. Maybe we just help people understand there are choices, that the forest holds truths our culture doesn't want to acknowledge." Jennifer started the truck, began driving back toward the ranger station. The roads looked strange now, too solid, too defined. Everything seemed like an illusion after what she'd seen, consensual hallucination that humans agreed to call reality. "Will you tell Sarah the truth?" she asked. "I'll tell her I got disoriented, fell, hit my head, found my way back." Standard explanation. She won't believe it, but she'll accept it. "Official report will say I survived through experience and luck. No one needs to know about the shadow people. But the young couple will be listed as missing, probably presumed dead eventually. That's their choice, Jennifer. They saw what lies beneath reality and chose to remain there. We can't force them back." It felt wrong, abandoning people to that liminal existence. But Jennifer remembered their expressions: peaceful, content, free from the weight of solid being. Maybe Tom was right. Maybe it was a choice, and respecting that choice meant letting them stay. The ranger station was bright with activity when they arrived. Search parties organizing, radios crackling. Sarah saw Tom and froze, then ran forward. "Oh my God, Tom, where have you been?" Tom launched into his prepared story: disorientation, injury, wandering in circles before finding his way back to the trail. Jennifer watched him lie smoothly, professionally, giving the explanation everyone needed to hear. Not the truth. The truth would sound insane. Just a comfortable fiction that let normal operations continue. Over the following weeks, Jennifer returned to regular duties, but everything felt different. She saw the shadow people constantly now, glimpses in her peripheral vision, presences felt at the edges of awareness. They watched her, patient and eternal, guardians of truth that most humans never wanted to see. Tom returned to work after a few days, seemingly unaffected, but Jennifer caught him sometimes staring into the forest with that new knowledge in his eyes, seeing what others couldn't, aware of the permeable nature of everything. The young couple were never found. Eventually declared lost, presumed dead, their families grieving losses they couldn't understand. Jennifer wanted to tell them the truth, that their loved ones weren't dead, weren't suffering, just existing in a different way. But how do you explain that? How do you give comfort through incomprehensible truth? She started keeping notes, documentation of encounters with the shadow people. Not official reports, those would get her dismissed as unstable. Personal records of sightings, patterns, interactions. Maybe someday she'd understand enough to help others, to be the bridge the shadow people said she could be. But for now, she just survived. Did her job, warned hikers to stay on marked trails, to travel in groups, to respect the forest. Simple advice that might save them from seeing truths they weren't ready to perceive. And at night, when she couldn't sleep, she'd drive back to the Ho River Trail and walk a short distance into the forest. The shadow people would be there watching. Sometimes she thought she saw Tom among them. Not the solid Tom who'd returned, but a shadow version that existed simultaneously. One foot in normal reality, and one in that liminal space. We're all between, Jennifer thought. All of us more absent than present, more shadow than substance. The shadow people just made that truth visible, let some of us see what we really are. It should have been terrifying. Maybe it was, but it was also strangely comforting. To know that reality was negotiable, that existence wasn't as solid and final as people believed, that there were choices beyond the ones society acknowledged. Jennifer Nakamura remained a ranger at Olympic National Park, remained between, neither fully solid nor fully shadow, neither completely present nor completely absent. The Shadow People's Bridge, helping others understand when they glimpsed the truth that existed beneath the comfortable illusion of reality. It wasn't the career she'd imagined, but standing in the Ho Rain Forest at twilight, aware of the figures watching from the spaces between trees, Jennifer understood she'd found her place, neither here nor there, but between. Exactly where she'd always been, even before she knew what that meant. The forest remembered. The Shadow People waited. And Jennifer Nakamura stood at the boundary, helping those who stumbled into truth find their way back, or forward, depending on what they chose to see. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The trail had been there yesterday. Jennifer was certain of it. She'd marked it on 3 separate maps. She stood at the trailhead where the Ho River Trail should have continued north toward Blue Glacier, her iPhone GPS showing one thing, her USGS topographic map showing another, and the actual forest in front of her showing a third. The path that had been clear and well-maintained 24 hours ago had vanished, not overgrown, not blocked by fallen trees or landslide, simply gone, replaced by dense undergrowth that looked decades old, moss-covered and undisturbed. Jennifer Nakamura pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to ease the headache building behind her eyes. First week of her first season as a ranger with the Forest Service, and already nothing made sense. She'd graduated from Colorado State with a degree in forestry and ecology, aced the interview process, spent 6 months in training, but nothing had prepared her for Olympic National Forest's fundamental wrongness. The way distances didn't match measurements, how landmarks shifted positions, the sensation of being watched by something that existed in her peripheral vision, but vanished when she looked directly. Her supervisor, Dale Richter, said everyone felt it at first. The disorientation would pass once she learned the forest's rhythms. But it had been 6 days, and if anything, the wrongness was intensifying. Brandon Mitchell had disappeared into this wrongness 3 days ago. 29 years old, experienced backpacker, carrying proper gear and following established trails. His vehicle remained at the Salduke Falls parking area, his planned route filed with the ranger station, his emergency contact, his sister in Seattle, calling every 4 hours for updates. Search and rescue had combed his intended path twice. Found nothing. No tracks, no torn fabric on branches, no equipment, no sign anyone had passed through at all. Yesterday, Jennifer had been assigned to verify the northern section of Mitchell's route, to document trail conditions, and look for any evidence SAR might have missed. She'd hiked the Ho River Trail to the junction with the Blue Glacier Trail, photographed everything, made detailed notes. The trail had been there. She had walked on it, had pictures on her phone proving it existed. Now it didn't. Jennifer pulled out her iPhone, scrolling to yesterday's photos. There, the trail junction clear as day. A wooden sign marking the Blue Glacier Trail, arrow pointing north. Dense Sitka spruce and western hemlock on either side. But the path itself obvious, worn by thousands of hikers over decades. She looked up from the screen. No sign, no path. Just forest, thick and impenetrable, moss hanging from branches like sodden curtains. Her phone buzzed. Text from Dale. Status update? She typed back. Trail junction inconsistent with yesterday's survey. GPS coordinates match but physical trail absent. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, say again. Jennifer stared at her screen, trying to find words that wouldn't make her sound insane. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Dale. Jennifer, what exactly are you seeing? She swallowed hard. The Blue Glacier Trail isn't here. I mean, it was here yesterday when I surveyed it, but now it's just gone, replaced by old-growth undergrowth. Silence on the line. Then, you're at the exact coordinates from yesterday? Yes, I triple-checked. Same location. But the trail has disappeared. More silence. Jennifer could hear Dale breathing, could imagine him rubbing his weathered face the way he did when paperwork frustrated him. "Okay," he said finally. "Mark the location, take photos, return to base. We'll figure this out." "What about Brandon Mitchell? If the trail's gone, how do we—" "Just come back, Jennifer. Now." The line went dead. Jennifer looked at her phone, feeling that familiar flutter of inadequacy in her chest. Dale probably thought she was confused, disoriented, making rookie mistakes. Couldn't read a map properly. Couldn't navigate. Wasn't cut out for this work. She took photos anyway, documenting the absence of trail, the dense forest where open paths should be. Through her phone's screen, the forest looked almost normal. But when she lowered the device and looked with her naked eyes, something was wrong with the space itself. The trees seemed too close together and too far apart simultaneously. The moss appeared to move when she wasn't looking directly at it. Shadows fell in directions that didn't match the sun's position. And something was watching her. She could feel it, a presence just beyond perception, studying her with interest that felt ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. Jennifer turned to head back. Stopped. The trail behind her, the one she'd hiked in on, the established Ho River trail she'd followed for 3 miles, was gone too. Her breath caught. This wasn't possible. She'd been standing here for maybe 10 minutes. Trails didn't disappear in 10 minutes. She spun in a slow circle, her heart rate spiking. Trees surrounded her in all directions, massive trunks of Sitka spruce rising 200 feet into the canopy, everything draped in that suffocating green moss. No path, no trail markers, no sign of human passage. The GPS on her iPhone showed her position clearly. Ho River Trail, mile marker 3.2, exact coordinates. But the physical reality didn't match. She was standing in virgin forest that looked untouched by human presence. Jennifer forced herself to breathe slowly, to think logically. Panic helped no one. She had her GPS, had her compass, an actual magnetic compass clipped to her pack, because Dale had insisted old technology sometimes worked better out here. She'd follow the GPS back, retracing her route by coordinates rather than visual landmarks. She started walking south, checking her phone every few steps. The GPS showed her moving along the trail, but she was pushing through undergrowth, climbing over fallen logs thick as cars, ducking under branches. No trail, just forest. After 20 minutes, she should have covered half a mile. Her GPS said she'd moved 60 feet. Jennifer stopped, staring at the screen. This wasn't right. She was walking at a normal pace, had been moving steadily. She should have covered much more ground. She tried again, walking faster this time, counting her steps. 100 paces should equal roughly 300 feet. She walked 100 paces, checked her GPS, 40 feet. Space itself was wrong. The realization hit her like cold water. This wasn't about trails disappearing or getting disoriented. The forest was somehow compressing distance, or she was walking through space that didn't correspond to normal geometry. Each step she took covered less ground than it should, as if the forest was expanding faster than she could traverse it. Jennifer pulled out her compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on magnetic north. She tapped the plastic casing. The needle continued its slow rotation, pointing everywhere and nowhere. Her phone buzzed. Text from Dale. "Jennifer, respond. What's your status?" She tried to reply, but the message wouldn't send. No signal, the screen showed, but she'd had 3 bars just minutes ago. Another buzz. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "You shouldn't be here." Jennifer stared at the message. How was she receiving texts with no signal? She tried to reply. "Who is this?" The message sent, even though her phone still showed no bars. 3 dots appeared immediately, someone typing. "The forest doesn't want you here. You need to leave before you end up like the others." Her hands shook. "What others? Brandon Mitchell?" Dots. Then, all of them. Everyone who walks too deep. The forest takes them, changes them. They become part of the spaces between. "Who are you?" No dots this time, just a response appearing instantly. "I was a ranger once, like you. That was 6 years ago. Or 60. Time doesn't work right here either." Jennifer's throat felt tight. "Where are you? I can help you." No one can help. I'm in the places that don't exist, the trails that never were. The forest makes new spaces constantly, and some of us fall into them. We're lost not because we can't find the way out, but because there is no out anymore. Just deeper in. The phone buzzed again. A photo appeared in the thread. A man, maybe 40, wearing a Forest Service uniform from an older style, standing in a forest clearing. But the trees in the background weren't right. They bent at angles that hurt to look at, curved in dimensions that shouldn't exist. And behind the man, shadows moved despite no visible light source. Dark shapes that almost resembled human figures but weren't, had never been human, were something else using human shape as a template. That's me, the next text read. 6 years ago, before I understood. The things in the shadows are why the trails disappear. They're reorganizing the forest, making it into something else. A place between the world you know and somewhere older. Jennifer wanted to dismiss this as a prank, some sick joke. But she was standing in a forest where trails vanished and space didn't work correctly, and her compass spun without stopping. Nothing about this situation made sense through rational frameworks. "How do I get out?" she typed. The response took longer this time. Finally. "You don't find the way out. You have to be let out. The shadows decide who stays and who leaves. I think they're curious about you, testing you. Be very careful what you do next." The message thread disappeared. Not deleted. The entire conversation vanished as if it had never existed. Jennifer frantically scrolled through her texts. Nothing. No unknown number. No photos of impossible forests. She looked up. The forest had changed again. The trees weren't in the same positions. Jennifer was certain of it. She'd been standing next to a massive Sitka spruce with a distinctive burled trunk. Now that tree was 30 feet to her left. Or was she remembering wrong? Had she moved without realizing? A sound echoed through the forest. Not an animal. Not wind. Something between a whisper and a sigh, like breath across the rim of a vast bottle. It seemed to come from every direction simultaneously, from the moss and the bark and the soil itself. Jennifer ran. She crashed through undergrowth, branches tearing at her jacket. No direction, just away, driven by primal fear. Her rational mind screamed that running blindly in forest was dangerous, that she needed to stop and assess, but terror overrode reason. She burst into a clearing and stopped, gasping. A tent stood in the center of the clearing. Modern REI brand, blue rainfly still staked down. Brandon Mitchell's tent. It had to be. "Brandon," Jennifer called out, her voice shaking. "Brandon Mitchell? Forest Service." No response. The tent's door was unzipped, the flap moving slightly in a breeze she couldn't feel. Jennifer approached slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from this place. But Brandon Mitchell might be inside, might need help. That's what rangers did. They helped people. She reached the tent, peered inside. Empty. A sleeping bag neatly arranged, a backpack propped against the tent wall. A camp stove, never used. Everything organized with the precision of someone who'd set up camp intending to stay multiple days. But no Brandon Mitchell. Jennifer backed away from the tent. This made no sense. SAR had covered this entire area. They would have found a tent this obvious, this intact. Unless the tent hadn't been here when they searched, unless it had appeared after, or in a space that hadn't existed during the search. She pulled out her phone, took photos. The images looked wrong on the screen. The tent was there, but behind it, the forest seemed to blur, like looking at a photograph that had been deliberately edited to obscure something in the background. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Jennifer spun toward it. Saw nothing, just trees and moss and that omnipresent green dimness. But something had moved, she was certain. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest's vastness. The shadow moved again. This time she saw it clearly. A dark shape between two trees, roughly human-sized but wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluidity that suggested no bones, no rigid structure. It slid behind a hemlock trunk and didn't emerge on the other side. Jennifer's breathing came in short gasps. She was hyperventilating, she realized distantly. Needed to calm down. Panic killed people in the wilderness more efficiently than bears or weather. She forced herself to breathe deeply, to count backwards from 10. When she reached 0, she looked around the clearing systematically, checking every angle. 3 more shadows positioned at even intervals around the clearing's perimeter. They didn't move now, just stood there, darker patches in the already dim forest. Watching. Patient. Jennifer's phone buzzed. She grabbed it desperately, hoping for Dale, for someone real and solid and from the world that made sense. Another text from the unknown number. Don't look at them directly. Don't acknowledge them. They want you to see them. That's how they pull you deeper. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. What are they? The forest's immune system. You're a foreign object. They're deciding whether to expel you or incorporate you. Stay calm. Show no fear. Fear marks you as prey. Jennifer tried to steady her breathing, tried to project confidence she didn't feel. She was a forest ranger. This was her domain. These were her woods. She belonged here. The shadows rippled as if responding to her thoughts. I'm leaving now, Jennifer said aloud, forcing her voice steady. I'm walking out of this clearing, back to the trail, back to my station. You can't stop me. She chose a direction, arbitrary since all directions felt equally wrong, and started walking. The shadows didn't move. She refused to look at them directly, kept her eyes forward, maintained steady pace. The edge of the clearing seemed farther away than it should be. She'd crossed half the distance, should be almost at the tree line, but it remained distant, as if space was stretching as she walked. Jennifer kept going, step after step. The clearing's edge didn't get closer. She stopped, turned around. The tent was impossibly far away, tiny in the distance, but she'd only walked maybe 30 feet. Space was wrong again, expanding and contracting according to rules she didn't understand. Don't stop. The text message appeared on her phone without her looking at it. She somehow knew it was there, could read it in her mind. They're testing your resolve. Keep moving, show no doubt. Jennifer walked. The forest swam around her, distances becoming meaningless. She might have walked for minutes or hours. Time felt thick, stretched thin, compressed and expanded simultaneously. But she kept moving forward with mechanical determination. Then, between one step and the next, she was somewhere else. A trail. Not the Hoh River Trail. This path was narrower, less maintained, barely visible through the undergrowth. But it was a trail, worn by feet, showing human passage. Jennifer stopped, looking back. The clearing was gone. She stood on a hillside she didn't recognize, surrounded by trees that felt subtly wrong. Too symmetrical, too evenly spaced, as if planted by someone trying to recreate a natural forest but not quite getting the randomness right. Her phone showed no GPS signal at all now. The compass app spun uselessly. She pulled out her backup compass. The needle pointed firmly in one direction, but she didn't trust it anymore. North might not mean what it used to mean. The trail led downhill. Jennifer followed it because there was nothing else to do. The slope steepened, the path winding between massive tree trunks. Moss covered everything, thick and luminous in the dim light. She realized she couldn't see the sky anymore. The canopy had closed completely overhead, creating a green twilight that revealed no sun position, no time indication. After what felt like an hour, or 10 minutes, or 3 hours, her sense of time completely unreliable, she heard water. A river, somewhere close. Relief flooded through her. Rivers were landmarks. Rivers were navigable. Follow a river downstream and eventually you'd reach civilization. The trail opened onto a riverbank. The Hoh River, she assumed, though something about it looked wrong. The water was too still, flowing but without the proper turbulence, as if obeying different physics. Mist hung over its surface, thick and unmoving. On the far bank stood a figure. Jennifer's breath caught. A person. Finally, another human being in this nightmare forest. "Hello," she called across the water. "I'm with the Forest Service. I need help." The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, partially obscured by mist. "Can you hear me?" Jennifer shouted. "I'm lost. I need to get back to the ranger station." The figure remained motionless. Jennifer squinted, trying to make out details through the mist. It was definitely human-shaped, average height, wearing what might be hiking clothes, but the proportions seemed wrong somehow. The way it stood too still, no natural movement, no shifting weight, no breathing. Slowly, as if moving through water, the figure raised one arm, pointed upstream. Jennifer looked in the indicated direction. Another trail, barely visible, leading along the riverbank. When she looked back, the figure was gone. Simply vanished, leaving no trace, the mist undisturbed. Jennifer stood on the riverbank, her mind struggling to process what she'd seen. Hallucination? Hypothermia? But she wasn't cold. The Olympic Peninsula's temperate rainforest never dropped to dangerous temperatures, even in October. And she'd eaten this morning, had water, wasn't dehydrated. This was real. Whatever real meant anymore. She followed the upstream trail because she had no better option. The river flowed beside her, that too still water reflecting nothing, its surface like dark glass. In the reflection, she occasionally caught glimpses of movement, shapes in the water that didn't match anything above it, fish that were too large, too angular, shadows that moved independently of light source. The trail led her to something impossible, a bridge, not a fallen log, not a natural crossing, an actual suspension bridge, modern construction, cables and wooden planks, stretching across the river to connect trails on both banks. Jennifer knew every bridge in Olympic National Forest, had studied the maps obsessively before her first day, memorized trail systems and infrastructure. There was no bridge here. This section of the Hoh River, if it even was the Hoh River, had no bridges marked on any map. But the bridge existed, solid, real, swaying slightly in a wind she couldn't feel. On the far side, at the bridge's terminus, someone had carved words into a wooden post. "The forest remembers what never was." Jennifer's skin prickled. She pulled out her phone, still no signal, battery down to 40%, and photographed the carved words. On her screen, the letters looked different. "The forest creates what always will be." She looked up at the actual carving. "The forest remembers what never was." Back to her phone screen. "The forest creates what always will be." The words were changing depending on how she observed them. Observer-dependent reality. Quantum mechanics applied to geography, to space itself. Jennifer crossed the bridge because what else could she do? The wooden planks were solid under her feet, the cables firm in her hands. It felt real, functioned like a real bridge, but she could feel its wrongness, the way it existed in space without quite being part of that space. A thing superimposed on reality from somewhere else. On the far side, the trail continued. And sitting on a fallen log beside the trail, as if waiting, was Brandon Mitchell. She knew it was him immediately. His photo had been circulated to all rangers shown at the morning briefings. 29 years old, brown hair cut short, athletic build, wearing a red North Face jacket. He sat casually, elbows on his knees, looking at her with mild interest. "Brandon?" Jennifer approached cautiously. "Brandon Mitchell? I'm Jennifer Nakamura, Forest Service. Everyone's been looking for you." Brandon smiled. "Have they? That's nice. But I don't think I want to be found." His voice sounded hollow, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Your sister is worried sick. We need to get you back to the ranger station, get you checked out medically." "I'm fine." Brandon gestured at the forest around them. "Better than fine, actually." "I understand now. The forest showed me what it's becoming." Jennifer knelt beside him, trying to assess his condition. He looked healthy. No visible injuries, no signs of hypothermia or dehydration. But his eyes were wrong. Too calm. looking at her but also through her, seeing something she couldn't. "What do you understand, Brandon?" "The spaces between," he said simply. "You think reality is solid, continuous, but it's not. There are gaps, spaces that don't quite exist but also do. The forest has learned to use them, to create new areas, new trails, new geography that isn't on any map, because it exists in the margins of space itself." Jennifer's stomach twisted. This confirmed what she'd been experiencing, but hearing it said aloud made it more real, more terrifying. "Why?" she asked. "Why is the forest doing this?" Brandon looked at her with something like pity. "Because humans keep building in it, keep cutting trails, putting up signs, trying to map it and control it and make it comprehensible. The forest is defending itself. Not violently, just creating spaces humans can't map, can't understand, can't colonize. It's pulling back into impossibility." "But that doesn't make sense. Forests don't have consciousness. They're ecosystems, biological systems. They don't—" "You're thinking too small," Brandon interrupted. "Consciousness isn't just brains and neurons. It's pattern and connection and information flow. The forest is conscious the way a city is conscious. Emergent property of billions of interconnected parts. The mycelium networks, the root systems, the chemical signals between trees, it's all one vast, distributed intelligence. And humans irritate it." Jennifer stood. "I need to get you out of here. You're suffering from exposure, from some kind of psychotic break. I'm suffering from clarity." Brandon remained seated, unmoving. "And I'm not leaving. I've decided to stay, to become part of the forest network. It's beautiful here, Jennifer. Peaceful. You stop fighting against your confusion and just accept that reality is more flexible than you thought. The shadows aren't threats, they're custodians, making sure the new spaces remain unspoiled." "The shadows?" Jennifer glanced around nervously. "You've seen them too?" "Of course, they're everywhere. Watching, maintaining, adjusting. They offered me a choice, leave and forget or stay and understand. I chose understanding." Brandon stood, and Jennifer realized he cast no shadow. The dim forest light fell on him normally, but the ground beneath his feet showed no darkness, no interruption of light. He was there, but also not there, existing slightly out of phase with normal space. "You should leave," Brandon said, not unkindly. "The bridge you crossed will let you return, but only if you choose to leave now. If you stay longer, you'll fall into the spaces between like I did, and then there's no going back." "I'm not leaving without you." "Yes, you are." Brandon smiled, and for just a moment Jennifer saw something else looking out through his eyes, something vast and ancient and utterly alien. "Because you're still afraid. Fear means you're not ready to let go of your rigid reality." "Go back, Jennifer Nakamura. Tell them Brandon Mitchell is fine. Tell them he chose to stay. Tell them the forest is changing, expanding into the spaces between spaces, and it's kinder to stop looking for the lost, because the lost don't want to be found." The shadows moved at the edges of her vision. Jennifer could see them clearly now, dozens of them surrounding the trail in a loose circle, watching, waiting. "How do I get back?" she whispered. "Cross the bridge, turn around 3 times, close your eyes, count to 7. When you open them, you'll be on the trail you recognize, but you have to do it now. They're patient, but not infinitely so." Jennifer looked at Brandon one last time. He looked peaceful, happy, insane. She turned and ran, back across the impossible bridge, her feet pounding on boards that shouldn't exist. Behind her she heard laughter, Brandon's voice but multiplied, layered, speaking in harmonies no human throat should produce. On the near side of the bridge, she stopped, turned around once, twice, 3 times, closed her eyes against the vertigo, counted to 7, opened her eyes. The Ho River Trail stretched before her, familiar and marked with proper signage. The bridge was gone. The river behind her flowed normally, turbulent and real. And her phone buzzed with signal, dozens of notifications flooding in, 17 missed calls from Dale, 23 texts from various rangers, Search teams had been looking for her for 18 hours. Jennifer stood on the normal trail in the normal forest and wondered if she'd hallucinated everything. But her phone's photo gallery told a different story. Images of the vanished trails, the impossible bridge, the carved words, Brandon Mitchell sitting on his log with no shadow. She stumbled back to the trailhead, where a search team found her. They wrapped her in blankets, checked her vitals, asked what happened. She told them the truth, that she got disoriented. The trails didn't match her maps. She'd lost sense of direction, omitted the parts about shadows and impossible spaces and Brandon choosing to stay. They searched for Brandon Mitchell for another week. Found nothing. His tent remained wherever it existed, in whatever space between spaces it had fallen into. He was declared officially missing, presumed deceased from exposure or injury, body unrecovered. Jennifer finished her first season with the Forest Service, requested transfer, was denied. Short-staffed, they said. She needed to complete at least one full year at Olympic. So she stayed, learned the trails that existed and avoided the spaces that didn't. Saw the shadows sometimes, watching from the periphery. Felt the forest's strange consciousness pressing against her own. Curious about this human who'd glimpsed its true nature and returned to tell no one. She deleted all the photos from her phone except one. The carved words on the bridge post kept it as a reminder that reality was more fragile than most people understood. That consciousness took forms humans hadn't imagined. That wilderness could be truly wild in ways that defied mapping and comprehension. 6 months into her second season, she received a text from an unknown number. You made the right choice. Fear kept you tethered to your reality. That's good. We need witnesses. People who've seen the spaces between, but chose to return, to remind humans that not everything should be mapped, measured, and controlled. The forest is becoming itself again. Unmappable, unknowable, as it should be. Jennifer never responded, but she kept the message, saved in a folder with the single photo. Sometimes when she hiked the trails alone, she felt the space around her stretch and compress, felt the forest testing her, seeing if she'd changed her mind, if she was ready to slip between the cracks of reality and join Brandon Mitchell and all the others who'd chosen understanding over return. She never was ready, stayed anchored in her fear, in her human need for solid ground and consistent geometry and reality that obeyed rules. But she understood now that Olympic National Forest was changing, that the mycelium networks and root systems and chemical signals between trees had formed something new, an intelligence vaster than human comprehension, defending its territory not through violence, but through impossibility, creating spaces that humans couldn't colonize because humans couldn't even perceive them consistently. And she understood that Brandon Mitchell was still out there, in the margins, in the gaps, part of the forest's consciousness now. Not dead, not lost, just existing in a space that never was but always would be, maintained by shadows, protected by wrongness, hidden in the cracks of a reality that was far less solid than anyone wanted to believe. Jennifer Nakamura finished her year at Olympic National Forest, transferred to a desk job in Seattle. Behind her, the wilderness continued its work, creating new trails and erasing old ones, expanding into impossible spaces, becoming something humanity couldn't map or measure or control. The forest remembered what never was. The forest created what always would be. And in the spaces between those two statements, Brandon Mitchell smiled, cast no shadow, and was content. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. David Ramirez found the teeth first, 7 of them arranged in a perfect circle on a flat rock, each one filed to a point that caught the morning light like tiny blades. He stood there at mile marker 12 on the Cascade Pass Trail, his Garmin GPS blinking 5,287 feet elevation, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years of ranger work, the specific discomfort of not knowing what he was looking at. The teeth were human molars, that much was certain, The filing marks were deliberate, surgical almost, creating edges that belonged in a predator's mouth. David crouched, his knees popping in the October cold, and photographed the arrangement without touching it. The rock itself sat 10 feet off the trail, positioned where someone would have to deliberately place it. Visible enough to be found, hidden enough to require looking. His radio crackled on his belt, dispatch running through morning check-ins with the other rangers scattered across the North Cascades. He didn't reach for it. The missing person report had come through at 600. Connor Burke, 28, experienced hiker, 3 days overdue from what should have been a simple overnight trip to Cascade Pass. His Subaru still sat in the trailhead parking lot, registration current, nothing obviously wrong. Standard procedure: follow the trail, check the established campsites, look for signs of injury or confusion. David had done this 40, maybe 50 times. People got turned around, twisted ankles, decided to extend their trips without telling anyone. The mountains were vast but not unknowable. There were patterns, predictable behaviors, statistical probabilities. The teeth didn't fit any pattern he knew. He stood and continued up the trail, noting the details automatically. Temperature 42 degrees, dropping. Barometric pressure falling. The Weather Service had called for a front moving in by tomorrow evening. The aspens had already lost their leaves, leaving skeletal white trunks that striped the evergreen slopes. The trail itself showed recent use. Boot prints in the damp soil, a candy wrapper he bagged for trash, the usual human debris of wilderness recreation. At marker 15, he found Connor Burke's campsite. The tent was still standing, which was wrong. If Burke had packed up to leave, there'd be no tent. If he'd encountered trouble, the tent would show signs: collapse, tears, the chaos of emergency. This tent stood perfectly erected, fly taut, stakes secure, as if its occupant had just stepped away for a moment. The flap hung open. David approached slowly, his hand instinctively touching the canister of bear spray on his belt. Connor Burke? National Park Service. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of an empty forest, but something else. An absence that felt deliberate. He noticed it then. No birds. The ravens that usually haunted these elevations, raucous and omnipresent, were gone. No squirrels chittering in the pines. No insects. Just wind and the distant sound of snowmelt running downslope. He cleared his throat and called again, louder. Nothing. The tent's interior was immaculate. Sleeping bag rolled, sleeping pad deflated and folded, backpack standing upright with everything precisely arranged. Too precise. David had seen how people actually camped. Gear strewn around, controlled chaos, the practical disorder of someone living temporarily in the woods. This looked staged, like a display in an outdoor equipment store. Connor Burke's wallet sat atop the backpack, open to his driver's license. Washington State, Seattle address, the photo showing a lean face with intelligent eyes. Beside it, car keys, a phone dead from cold and no signal, and a small spiral notebook. David picked up the notebook, flipping through pages of trail notes and mileage calculations. The handwriting was neat, engineering precise. He found the last entry, dated 4 days ago. Something following me since yesterday. Not animal. Wrong sound. Wrong rhythm. Keeps pace exactly, but never shows itself. Ranger at station said no other hikers on trail this week, so what am I hearing? The entry stopped mid-page, the pen trailing off into an illegible scratch. David felt his pulse quicken. Not fear exactly, but a recalibration of assessment. He keyed his radio. Station, this is Ramirez. Located Burke's campsite, mile 15 Cascade Pass. Tent intact, gear present, no sign of subject. Requesting additional unit for expanded search. Static answered him. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. More static, thick and granular, like the radio was underwater. He checked the display, full battery, correct channel. The North Cascades could be tricky for radio transmission, but he'd never experienced complete failure at this elevation. He tried his cell phone. No signal, which was expected. What wasn't expected was the way the screen flickered when he turned it on, displaying the time as 3:47 a.m. before correcting itself to 10:23 a.m. David made himself breathe slowly, applying the methodology that had served him well through dozens of searches. Evidence first, speculation later. Facts. Burke had been here 4 days ago. Something had concerned him. He'd apparently left without his gear, which suggested either panic or coercion. The surrounding area would show tracks, signs of direction. He began a spiral search pattern, moving outward from the campsite in widening circles. The first circuit revealed nothing. The second showed a deer trail heading northeast, but no human prints. The third. He stopped. The trees had been marked, not with the standard trail blazes, but with symbols carved deep into the bark, geometric patterns that looked almost like letters, but belonged to no alphabet David recognized. They spiraled around the trunks in descending rings, the wood beneath dark and weeping sap. 7 trees in a rough circle, each bearing identical markings. David had worked with indigenous communities during his training. He knew the basics of Coast Salish art, recognized the respectful distance tribal authorities requested around certain sites. These symbols felt old in a way that made his scalp tighten, but they weren't any traditional markings he'd encountered. He photographed each one, moving from tree to tree. The carved patterns seemed to shift in his peripheral vision, but when he looked directly, they were static, fixed, probably a trick of the light filtering through the canopy. At the 7th tree, he found the blood. Not a lot, just a smear about chest height, already darkening to brown. The amount suggested a nosebleed or minor cut, nothing traumatic. David swabbed it carefully with the evidence kit he carried, labeled it, and continued searching. The trail beyond the trees led upslope, toward a section of the park rarely visited. The official trail switched back west toward the pass itself, but this route went nearly straight north, steep enough to require hands and feet in places. Fresh disturbances in the duff suggested recent passage, broken twigs, displaced stones, the subtle signs of someone moving uphill. David checked his watch, 11:45 a.m. He had maybe 6 hours of good daylight, less if the cloud cover thickened. Protocol said he should return to the station, report his findings, wait for backup. But protocol was written for normal searches, and something about the perfect arrangement of Burke's campsite, the silence of the forest, the teeth on the rock, felt distinctly not normal. He started climbing. The temperature dropped as he gained elevation, his breath beginning to fog. The GPS showed him ascending beyond the maintained trail system, into terrain designated wilderness area, minimal human intervention, maximum difficulty. The tracks continued, occasionally marked by scuff marks on stones or broken vegetation. Whoever had come this way was moving fast, too fast for the terrain. At 6,200 feet, he found the second campsite. This one was old, maybe decades abandoned. The remains of a fire ring, barely visible under accumulated duff. Rusted tent stakes, the fabric long since rotted away. And arranged in the center, fresh and deliberate, a circle of stones with something dark at the center. David approached carefully. The dark object was a bird, a raven, wings spread and pinned to the ground with small sticks, its chest cavity opened with surgical precision. The organs had been removed and arranged beside it in a pattern that reminded him sickeningly of the teeth on the rock, deliberate, symbolic, meant to be read. He was looking at a ritual site. The realization came with a wash of adrenaline. Someone was performing ceremonies in the park, ceremonies that involved human remains and animal sacrifice. Connor Burke had stumbled onto something, been taken or chased, and now, a sound stopped his thoughts. Distant but distinct. A voice calling. Help! The word came from upslope, thin and desperate. David's training kicked in immediately. Connor Burke, I'm a park ranger, stay where you are. He scrambled upward, loose scree sliding under his boots. The voice called again, closer now but oddly directionless, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. His radio sparked to life, suddenly discharged static, making him jump. Amirez, return to... The voice cut out, replaced by a sound like breathing, ragged and wet. Dispatch, I have possible contact with missing subject, moving to... Not Burke, not... The radio died completely, the display going dark despite fresh batteries that morning. David climbed faster. The trees thinned as he neared the ridgeline, subalpine firs giving way to stunted whitebark pine. The sky above was darkening prematurely, clouds rolling in with that peculiar green-gray quality that promised early snow. The voice called again, and this time he could hear it properly. "Help me. Please. I'm so cold." He burst into a small clearing and stopped. Connor Burke stood 50 feet away facing him, the man from the driver's license photo, wearing the same jacket described in the missing person report. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, face slack with an expression David couldn't read. "Connor Burke?" David fought to control his breathing, his voice coming out steady through training and will. "I'm Ranger Ramirez. Are you injured?" Burke didn't respond, didn't blink, just stood there swaying slightly. David moved closer, hand on his radio despite knowing it was dead. Something was wrong with Burke's eyes. They reflected the dim light like an animal's, a shine that human eyes didn't produce. "Connor, can you hear me? Do you need medical attention?" "Cold," Burke said, but his mouth didn't move properly, the words seeming to come from somewhere behind his teeth. "So cold. Hungry." The smell hit David then. Rot and copper and something else. Something chemical and sharp that made his sinuses burn. He stopped advancing, every instinct screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. Burke's head tilted, the movement too smooth. Vertebrae bending at angles that shouldn't be possible. 15 years, he said. And now the voice was different, deeper, coming from somewhere in his chest. 15 years walking these mountains, never listening, never hearing. The old ones tried to tell you the markers were warnings. David's hand moved to the bear spray, unclipping it slowly. "You're not Connor Burke." The thing wearing Burke's face smiled, and David saw that the teeth behind the lips had been filed to points. Connor heard. Connor listened. Connor's bones are very quiet now. It moved, not running, flowing, body rippling like something without fixed joints, crossing the distance between them in a motion that shouldn't have been possible. David sprayed, the capsaicin stream catching it full in the face. It kept coming, the spray seeming to pass through it like mist. He ran, down the slope, abandoning any attempt at a controlled descent. Just speed and terror and the sound of something behind him that breathed like a bellows and moved through the trees, with the terrible inevitability of landslide. His ankle turned on loose rock and he sprawled, rolling, fetching up against a tree hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. The thing that had been Burke stood above him, silhouetted against the darkening sky. It was changing, the human shape becoming suggestion rather than reality, limbs elongating and torso narrowing into something gaunt and terrible. "The mountains keep their own," it said, and the voice was wind through dead trees. "The hungry season comes. The debt must be paid in meat and marrow." David scrabbled backwards, hand closing on a rock. It felt absurd, a stone against whatever this was, but it was something to hold, something real. "What are you?" "You know," it said, and somehow that was worse than any answer. "Your people forgot, but the knowledge sleeps in your blood. Wendigo. Windigo. The spirit of the winter that eats. We were here before your trails, before your maps, before your certainty." It took a step closer and David could see now that Connor Burke's face was a mask stretched over something else, something with too many bones and eyes that were windows into nothing. "We are the price of greed, of hunger, of wanting more than the world should give." Another step. He came into our territory, took without asking, ate without gratitude. The old contracts still hold, Ranger. The wilderness still demands payment. David's fingers found his knife, 8 inches of fixed blade steel. It felt like a toothpick. "I'm leaving. I'm going down to my station, and I'm bringing people back." "No," it said simply. "You saw the markers. You read the signs. You came anyway, full of knowing, full of pride. The perfect meal, a man who thinks he has conquered what cannot be conquered." It crouched, preparing to spring, and David saw his death in its eyes. The gunshots split the air like lightning. The creature jerked, stumbled, a hole appearing in what had been Connor Burke's shoulder. It screamed, a sound that shredded the air, and David saw it properly for a moment. Antlers of bone piercing through human skin, a mouth that opened too wide, hands that ended in claws of filed teeth and yellowed nails. "Move, Ranger!" David rolled and ran toward the voice. A figure emerged from the tree line, an old woman, indigenous features, gray hair in a long braid, holding a lever-action rifle like she'd been born with it. She fired again, working the action with practiced speed, and the creature retreated into the trees with that impossible fluidity. "Come on before it circles." She grabbed his arm, pulling him down the slope with surprising strength. "You walked right into a feeding ground, fool man. What were you thinking?" There was a missing person. The missing person is gone. Been gone. This is what happens when city people forget the old ways. She moved quickly despite her age, following a route that seemed to appear under her feet. "I'm Sarah Yellowtail. My family has lived in these mountains for 10,000 years. We know what walks here when winter comes close." They half ran, half slid down the mountain. Behind them, David could hear crashing through brush, the sound of something large pacing them out of sight. "What is it? What's actually happening?" "Wendigo," Sarah said, not slowing. "Spirit of hunger, of winter, of wanting more than you need. Someone violated the old rules up here, took too much, disrespected the balance. The Wendigo wakes when that happens. It takes people, wears them, makes them into itself. Your missing man? He's part of it now, part of the hunger." "That's impossible. That's mythology." She laughed, harsh and sharp. "Tell that to the thing chasing us. My grandmother warned the Park Service when they built the station. Told them there were places people shouldn't go, seasons when the trails should close. They smiled and nodded and did what they wanted anyway. Every few years someone goes missing in October, November. Always the same area, always the same signs. Park Service writes it up as accidents, exposure, animal attacks. Easier than admitting there are things in these mountains older and meaner than humans." They reached a creek, icy water running fast over smooth stones. Sarah didn't hesitate, plunging in and wading downstream. David followed, the cold shocking his legs numb. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're stupid, not evil. And because my grandchildren like visiting the ranger station. You tell them good stories, teach them about bears and cougars. Figured you were worth saving, at least once." She pulled herself onto the far bank, water streaming from her jeans. "Can't cross running water, old rule. One of the few things that still works." David clambered up beside her, looking back. The forest across the creek was still, silent, but he could feel something watching from the shadows. "How do we stop it?" "Stop it?" Sarah laughed again. "You don't stop it, Ranger. You survive it. You leave offerings at the old places. You speak the old words. You don't go into the deep woods when the leaves fall. You remember that this isn't your land. It's leased, temporary, conditional. The Wendigo is the enforcement mechanism. Break the contract. Pay the price." "So Connor Burke is just gone? And anyone else who goes up there? We'll be safe if they're respectful. Dangerous if they're not. It's not complicated." She started walking downstream, following the creek toward lower elevations. "The problem is your people think nature is a park, a playground, something you conquered and controlled. Up here?" She gestured at the darkening forest. "Nature is still nature. Still red in tooth and claw, still hungry, still keeping score." They walked in silence for a while, the sound of water covering their passage. David's mind raced, trying to fit what he'd seen into any framework that made sense. It wouldn't fit. The thing wearing Connor Burke's face, the teeth arranged in circles, the symbols carved in trees, it all pointed to something beyond his understanding of how the world worked. "The teeth," he said finally, "on the rock. Were those previous meals?" Sarah said quietly. "The Wendigo leaves tokens, warnings, territory markers. Sometimes people find them and listen. Usually they don't. She glanced at him. You found them and kept going. That kind of stubborn confidence, that's what it feeds on. Literally. It prefers people who think they can't be touched. I was doing my job. Following procedure. Procedure. She said it like a curse. You want to know what proper procedure is for a Wendigo feeding ground? You close the trail. You put up signs. You tell people about it. Not danger, falling rocks, or caution, steep terrain. Real signs. This place is sacred. This place is hungry. Enter with respect or not at all. But you can't do that because then you'd have to admit there are things in the world your science doesn't explain. They emerged from the forest onto a logging road, overgrown but passable. Sarah pointed down the slope. Your station is 4 miles that way. Get there before full dark. Tell your supervisors whatever you want, they won't believe the truth anyway. Burke will be filed as missing, presumed dead. Maybe they'll find some bones in the spring, blame it on exposure. You're not coming? I live the other direction, and I have things to do, offerings to make, prayers to say, apologies to offer on behalf of dumb rangers who wander into places they shouldn't. She met his eyes, and he saw genuine sympathy there. This will follow you, you know. Not the creature, you're not marked, you got away. But the knowledge. You'll never walk these mountains the same way again. Every quiet moment will make you wonder. Every missing person case will make you think. That's the real curse of seeing, you can't unsee. She turned and walked into the trees, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every trail, every game path, every safe route through dangerous country. David watched her go, then started the long walk back to his station. The sun was setting when he reached the ranger station, painting the peaks orange and gold. Beautiful, like every sunset he'd seen in 15 years of work. Except now he knew what lived in those beautiful mountains, what waited in the spaces between the trails. His supervisor was waiting, concerned and irritated in equal measure. Ramirez, where the hell have you been? We lost radio contact 6 hours ago. David looked at his supervisor. A good man, competent, rational, trained in the same procedures David trusted. He thought about trying to explain. Thought about the report he'd have to write, the evidence he'd need to provide, the psychiatric evaluation that would follow if he told the truth. Found Burke's campsite, he said instead. Gear present, no sign of the subject, looks like he headed off trail. Probably got disoriented. Searched until dark started coming on. I recommend expanded search tomorrow if weather permits. His supervisor nodded, already mentally writing the operational plan. Weather service says snow tonight, heavy. We'll have to wait it out. I'll call the family, let them know we're doing everything we can. David nodded and went to his quarters, a small cabin behind the main station. He sat on his bunk, still wearing his damp clothes, and opened his camera to review the photos he'd taken. The teeth on the rock, the symbols carved in trees, the ritual site with the raven. Every image was corrupted, digital noise, strange light artifacts, as if something in the camera didn't want those images to exist. Only one photo remained clear, Connor Burke's campsite, pristine and empty, waiting for someone who would never return. David deleted the corrupted files and began writing his report. Lost subject, presumed disoriented, extreme weather moving in, search to resume when conditions permit. Standard language, standard format, standard conclusions. The same report written hundreds of times across decades of Park Service operations. He paused halfway through, remembering Sarah Yellowtail's words, "You can't unsee." Outside, the first snow began to fall, early and heavy. The kind of snow that buried trails and erased tracks and covered everything in blank white silence. The kind of snow that the old people called the hungry season, when the mountains took back what they were owed. David saved his report and looked out the window at the darkness beyond. Somewhere up there, in the high country near the ridgeline, something moved through the early winter night. Something that had been Connor Burke and was now part of something older, something patient, something that would wait through the snow and ice until spring brought new hikers, new confidence, new opportunities to feed. He thought about quitting, thought about requesting a transfer to a different park, different mountains, different wilderness. But he knew it wouldn't matter. The knowledge was in him now, permanent as a scar. Every forest would hold shadows. Every quiet moment would carry threat. Every missing person would make him wonder. The snow fell harder, covering the world in white. David turned off the lights and lay down in the darkness, listening to the wind. It sounded almost like words, almost like laughter, almost like something that had learned human language just well enough to call for help. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or any night after without seeing Connor Burke's face. That terrible moment of recognition before the human mask had slipped and shown what lived underneath. The search resumed 3 days later, when the snow stopped. They found nothing, no tracks, no body, no evidence. Connor Burke was officially listed as missing, presumed dead from exposure. His parents held a memorial service. The case file was closed. David returned to work, following his trails, checking his campsites, helping lost hikers find their way. Professional, competent, respected. But he avoided the northern trails now. Stayed away from the high country when October came. And when people asked him for route recommendations, he found himself warning them away from certain areas, using vague language about difficult terrain and unreliable weather. The other rangers noticed the change, called him cautious, overly protective. David didn't argue. He simply remembered Sarah Yellowtail's words about proper procedure, about signs that told the truth, about respecting what you didn't understand. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, he would find things left at the trailhead, small bundles of sage, stones arranged in patterns, offerings to something older than the park boundaries. He never moved them, never questioned them, just made note in his log that trail maintenance had been completed and everything was secure. The mountains kept their own. The wilderness still demanded payment. And David Ramirez, 15 years experienced, confident no longer, walked his trails with new understanding. The maps showed clear boundaries, marked trails, designated campsites. But the real map, the one written in blood and bone and 10,000 years of human memory, showed something else entirely. It showed feeding grounds, sacred spaces, places where the old contracts still held and the hungry season still came. Places where humans were tolerated on sufferance, where confidence was a liability, where the price of forgetting was measured in teeth arranged in perfect circles. Connor Burke had forgotten, or had never known, and now he walked the mountains with new purpose, calling to hikers in distress, leading them upslope to where something patient and ancient waited to collect what it was owed. David thought about warning people, about breaking procedure and telling the truth. But who would believe him? And what would happen if he violated the unspoken agreement that let rangers work these mountains at all? The agreement that they would be respectful, cautious, humble in the face of forces beyond their understanding. So he kept his silence, did his job, helped the people he could help. And when October came each year, he thought of Connor Burke and Sarah Yellowtail, and the thing that wore human faces in the high country, thought about the debt that nature demanded and the price of thinking you could walk anywhere without consequence. The mountains kept their own. They always had. And David Ramirez, who had once been so certain he understood them, now knew only this: that certainty itself was dangerous, that confidence was a kind of blindness, and that the wilderness was always watching, always hungry, always waiting for someone to forget the old rules. The snow would fall again. Winter would come, and up in the high country, beyond the marked trails and maintained campsites, something would wait with infinite patience for the next hiker who walked into the woods believing they had conquered what could never be conquered. David lived with that knowledge, carried it like stones in his pockets, weighing him down, keeping him grounded. And on quiet nights when the wind moved through the pines like breathing, he whispered small prayers to whatever still listened, prayers of respect, of gratitude, of acknowledgement that he walked on borrowed land, in borrowed time, by the grace of powers that predated human language. The mountains kept their own. And David Ramirez had learned, finally and forever, that he would never truly be one of them. The boot print measured exactly 11 inches from heel to toe. Robert Fitzgerald had documented it 3 times with his digital camera, taken plaster casts, measured the stride pattern extending 40 feet into the laurel thicket. Standard adult male, size 10 boot, likely a Merrill hiking model based on the tread. But the boot print sat 18 inches deep in limestone bedrock that geologists dated to the Precambrian era, stone that had been solid for over 1 billion years. He crouched beside it for the 4th time in 20 minutes, his field notebook balanced on his knee, trying to write an explanation that wouldn't make him sound insane. The November wind cut through the gaps in his patrol jacket, carrying the smell of decay from somewhere deeper in the forest. Madison Garcia had been missing for 36 hours, and this was the first physical evidence anyone had found. Robert Fitzgerald didn't believe in things he couldn't measure, categorize, and explain. 15 years with the National Park Service had taught him that mystery usually meant insufficient data. He'd found lost hikers by calculating water consumption rates and probable shelter-seeking behavior. He'd tracked poachers using game camera timestamps and vehicular wear patterns on maintenance roads. He solved problems through observation, documentation, and logical analysis. The stone shouldn't have a boot print in it. Stone didn't work that way. He ran his gloved fingers along the impression's edge, feeling where Madison's boot, confirmed by her roommate to be Merrill Moab ventilators, women's size 8, had somehow pressed into rock harder than steel. The depth was uniform, as if she'd been standing still when the impossible happened. No scuff marks, no signs of force or impact, just a perfect print where no print should exist. His Garmin GPS flickered, coordinates jumping between 35.6332 degree N, 83.4910 degree W, and complete static. 3rd time in the last hour. Robert documented the malfunction in his notebook, adding it to a growing list of equipment irregularities that made no sense. His Motorola radio had been cycling through dead channels since he'd crossed Klingman's Dome at dawn. His compass needle trembled constantly, never quite settling on magnetic north. Insufficient data, he told himself. Solar flare activity, magnetic anomaly in the geology. Explanations existed. He just needed to find them. The search grid had been his design, a systematic sweep pattern covering the 12 square miles between the Appalachian Trail and the Forney Creek watershed, where Madison had last checked in with the ranger station. She'd been 3 days into a solo backpacking trip, experienced enough to know the trails, careful enough to file proper permits. Her last radio contact had been unremarkable. Good weather, making camp near elevation 5,200 feet, planning to summit Mount Buckley in the morning, then silence. Robert had organized the search teams with his characteristic precision. Volunteers from the local SAR unit, 2 other rangers, a helicopter when weather permitted. He'd calculated probable search areas based on Madison's fitness level, typical hiking speed, reported supplies. Mathematics didn't lie. People did. And nature was chaotic. But numbers represented truth. The numbers had led him here, to this impossible boot print in billion-year-old stone. He heard movement in the laurel, something large pushing through the dense understory. Robert stood slowly, one hand moving to the canister of bear spray on his belt. Black bears were common in the Smokies, particularly in November when they were hyperphagia before winter, consuming anything edible to build fat reserves. "Madison Garcia," he called out, voice steady. Protocol dictated announcing yourself, giving a lost hiker something human to orient toward. National Park Service. "If you can hear me, make noise. Help is here." The movement stopped. Complete silence pressed in. No bird calls, no wind rustle, nothing. Robert's analytical mind cataloged the absence of sound as another data point requiring explanation. Forest ecosystems generated ambient noise constantly. This stillness felt subtraction rather than quiet, as if something had removed sound from the air itself. Then he heard breathing, too heavy for a human, too rhythmic for a bear. A wet, labored sound like damaged lungs pulling air through fluid. It came from multiple directions simultaneously, ahead in the laurel, behind him near a massive hemlock, off to his left, where the ground dropped into a creek ravine. Robert pulled out his mag light, sweeping the beam across the undergrowth. The light revealed nothing but vegetation, the silver green of rhododendron leaves catching illumination, but the breathing continued surrounding him, and he caught a smell beneath the decay he'd noticed earlier. Something animal and wrong, like a deer carcass left too long in summer heat. His training said, "Don't panic, observe and document." His hindbrain, the part that remembered when humans were prey, said run. He chose observation. Robert activated his digital voice recorder, documenting everything. November 7th, 2011, 14:47 hours. Grid section, Baker 7, coordinates approximately 35, 633 north, 83,491 west. Investigating physical evidence related to missing person Madison Garcia, encountering anomalous auditory phenomena. The breathing shifted to a sound he couldn't categorize. Not quite language, not quite animal noise, a wet clicking that formed patterns, rhythms that almost resembled words if words could be spoken by something without a human tongue. Madison's second boot print appeared 6 feet away, this one pressed into the trunk of a living oak tree, 12 feet off the ground. Robert approached it slowly, his analytical framework cracking at the edges. The print was perfect, clearly defined, the Merrill tread pattern unmistakable. But Madison Garcia was 5'6". The oak's lowest branch was 20 feet up. Nothing in his database of explanations covered this. He photographed it. Documentation was his anchor to rationality. If he could record it, measure it, preserve it as evidence, then it had to exist within some framework of natural law, even if he didn't yet understand the framework. The clicking sound resolved into something that might have been his name. Robert Fitzgerald. Each syllable separated, pronunciation perfect but cadence wrong, as if whatever spoke was reading phonetically from a list without understanding the language. He spun, flashlight beam cutting across the darkening forest. The sun was dropping fast behind Klingman's dome, temperature falling with it. His breath came out in visible plumes. Too cold for November, even at elevation. His truck's thermometer had read 48 degrees when he'd parked at the trailhead. Now it felt 20 degrees colder. "Identify yourself," Robert called out, fighting to keep his voice level. "This is federal land. You're interfering with a search and rescue operation." Something laughed. The sound came from his right, but when he turned toward it, it came from behind him. Then ahead, then from directly above, in the oak canopy where Madison's impossible footprint decorated the trunk. Robert's hands were shaking. He forced them still, forced his breathing to slow. Panic served no purpose. He needed data. He needed to understand. A shape moved between two trees 50 yards ahead. Too fast, wrong proportions. Robert's mind tried to categorize it. Human height but digitigrade stance, moving on legs that bent backward at the knee. But that was impossible. No human anatomy worked that way. His flashlight beam found only empty space where the shape had been. His radio crackled. Through the static, a voice. "Robert, do you copy? This is base. Report your position." He grabbed for the Motorola. "Base, this is Fitzgerald. Grid Baker 7. Experiencing..." He stopped. Experiencing what? Equipment malfunction? Auditory hallucinations? A paradigm shift in his understanding of physical possibility? 3 other teams reporting the same anomalies. The dispatcher's voice cut in and out, advising all personnel to return to coordinate something in the... Static swallowed the transmission. Robert tried to respond, but his radio was dead, the LED display showing gibberish characters that shouldn't exist in the device's programming. That's when he saw Madison Garcia. She stood at the edge of the laurel thicket, maybe 30 yards distant, exactly where protocol said to search. Her hiking clothes were intact. Green jacket, black pants, the Merrill boots that had left impossible prints in stone and bark. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the ponytail shown in her permit photo. Everything about her appearance matched his memorized description. Except her eyes. They reflected his flashlight beam like an animal's. That distinctive greenish eyeshine from a tapetum lucidum that humans didn't possess. "Madison?" His voice cracked on her name. "Madison Garcia? I'm Ranger Fitzgerald. You've been reported missing. Are you injured?" She smiled. Her teeth were too white, too many, like they'd been replaced with something that approximated teeth without quite understanding their function. When she spoke, her mouth didn't move correctly, lips and jaw out of sync with the sounds. Robert Fitzgerald, 37 years old, mother, deceased. Father, Colorado. No siblings, no wife, no children, lives alone, always alone. His service record wasn't classified, but those details weren't public either. He felt his analytical framework shuddering, fundamental assumptions about reality coming unmoored. How do you know? She told me, Madison said, but her voice had changed, deepened, taken on harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. Before, when she was still mostly her. The shape behind Madison resolved into something his mind kept trying to reject. 7 feet tall, emaciated to the point of skeletal, covered in matted hair and skin that looked like cured leather stretched too tight over bones. But the worst part was how human elements remained. Hands with 2 long fingers, a face that held hints of symmetry, eyes that watched him with unmistakable intelligence. It wore Madison's jacket like a trophy. The green fabric hung off its frame, sleeves shredded, dark stains across the chest that Robert's forensic training identified as blood spatter, arterial pattern. "You can't be real," he said, and hated how much he sounded like he was begging. "You don't exist. Skinwalkers are Navajo mythology. We're in Tennessee. The folklore doesn't even match the region." The thing cocked its head, and Robert saw that the movement was too fluid, joints bending in directions that vertebrate anatomy didn't allow. When it spoke, the voice came from Madison's mouth, but the words originated from the creature behind her. "We were here before your people named anything. Before the Cherokee called these mountains Shakanaj. Before geology measured our age in billions. We've always been here, Robert Fitzgerald. In the places where your measurements fail, in the gaps between your data points." Madison took a step toward him. Her boot pressed into solid rock and sank an inch deep, stone yielding like wet clay. Another step. The oak tree bent away from her passage, bark splitting, the wood inside moving like muscle tissue. Robert backed up, his rational mind screaming that he needed more information, more evidence, that understanding was possible if he just observed carefully enough. But his body knew better. His body recognized a predator. "The others are already changing," the voice continued, still using Madison's mouth. "Your search teams grid Alpha through Echo. We've been calling them, one by one, showing them what she saw, what you're seeing now, the choice beneath the choice." His radio crackled again. Through the static he heard screaming, high and terrified and cut short. Then another voice, calm and professional, reporting coordinates that made no sense, numbers that couldn't exist within the longitude-latitude system. Then something that might have been laughter or might have been the sound of bones breaking. "You solve problems," the thing said. "Calculate, measure, find patterns. So find the pattern in this, Robert Fitzgerald. Every 107 years, we need to feed, not on flesh. There's no nourishment in meat. We feed on certainty, on the human need to explain, categorize, understand. We eat the frameworks you build to feel safe." Madison was 10 feet away now, and Robert could see that her skin had started to split along the seams, something else moving underneath. Her fingers had grown longer, nails darkening to claws, but her eyes, her human eyes, still showed in the sockets, terrified and aware and trapped inside whatever was consuming her from within. "She fought," the voice said almost admiringly. "Madison Garcia fought so hard, analytical mind like yours. Tried to reason through what was happening. Built hypotheses even as we took her certainty, piece by piece. She lasted 4 hours before the transformation completed." "How long will you last?" Robert felt it then, a pressure inside his skull, like hands pushing against the inside of his forehead. His thoughts became slippery, facts he'd known since childhood suddenly uncertain. Was he 37? Or 38? Had his mother died, or was she alive in Oregon? Colorado? Had he ever had a mother at all? His name felt wrong in his mouth when he tried to say it. Robert. Was that right? The letters seemed arbitrary, The sounds meaningless. No. He grabbed onto that single word like an anchor. No. He was Robert Fitzgerald, Ranger, analyst. He existed. Facts existed. Reality was measurable, even if he didn't yet have the tools to measure this. Behind him, something that had been Madison Garcia gave chase, but the sounds it made were wrong. Too many footfalls, gaits that shifted between human bipedalism and something quadrupedal. The breathing came from every direction again, and Robert realized with horror that it wasn't multiple creatures. It was one creature moving through space in ways that three-dimensional physics shouldn't allow. His flashlight beam swung wild as he crashed through the Laurel, following the creek ravine downhill toward where his truck should be parked. His GPS was useless, showing coordinates that placed him simultaneously in Tennessee and coordinates that didn't exist on Earth. His compass spun in full circles, but he could navigate by terrain. Water flowed downhill. Creeks led to trails. Trails led to roads. He didn't need instruments. He had observation and logic. Something grabbed his shoulder from behind. Fingers too long, grip too strong. Robert twisted free, feeling fabric tear, and fell hard into the creek. The water was wrong, too thick, moving upstream, and when he broke the surface gasping, he saw his reflection looking back at him with eyes that reflected light they shouldn't reflect. He scrambled out, soaked and shaking. The temperature had dropped further, his wet clothes already stiffening with ice. Hypothermia would kill him in hours if exposure didn't get him first. Focus solved the problem. He'd done cold weather survival training. He needed fire, shelter, dry clothes. He needed to think, but thinking was getting harder. The pressure in his skull increased, and with it came intrusive thoughts that weren't his own. Memories that hadn't happened. Standing at the edge of the forest, calling to other hikers in Madison's voice, watching them approach with trust on their faces, the satisfaction of uncertainty spreading like infection, logical frameworks crumbling, the delicious terror of minds unable to cope with paradigm collapse. Robert bit his tongue hard enough to draw blood, using pain to anchor himself to his body. These weren't his thoughts. He was being shown what Madison had experienced, what the thing wanted him to experience. "Stop," he said aloud. "I know what you are. I researched the legends when I took this position. Ye Nald Lushi, skinwalkers, Navajo witches who violated cultural taboos. But those stories come from the Four Corners region, not the Appalachians. You're in the wrong territory." The clicking laughter surrounded him. "We were never confined to one people's stories, Robert Fitzgerald. Humans everywhere have names for us: Witiko, Utbird, Strziga, 1,000 others. Different cultures, same fear. The terror of transformation, of boundaries dissolving, of the certainty that you are you melting away." A figure emerged from the trees ahead, another ranger, Jim Hendricks, who'd been searching Grid Alpha. But Jim moved wrong, his joints articulating at impossible angles. His ranger uniform was torn, and through the gaps, Robert saw skin that looked like poorly tanned leather. "It's amazing," Jim said in a voice that resonated with harmonics no human throat produced. "When you stop fighting, when you let go of the need to understand, there's such freedom in dissolution." Behind Jim, two more figures. Sarah Chen from the SAR team, Marcus Webb, the volunteer coordinator. Both moving with that same terrible fluidity, joints bending wrong, eyes reflecting light they shouldn't reflect. Robert's analytical mind tried one more time to find an explanation. Mass hallucination, ergot poisoning, carbon monoxide, some toxin in the water supply causing synchronized psychosis. There had to be a rational answer, because reality itself depended on rational answers existing. But the pressure in his skull reached a crescendo, and he felt something fundamental crack. The certainty that 2 + 2 = 4 became uncertain. The knowledge that the sun would rise tomorrow became questionable. Every fact he'd ever learned, every measurement he'd trusted, every logical framework he'd built his understanding upon, all of it revealed itself as arbitrary, as nothing more than shared agreement that could be unmade. He was Robert Fitzgerald, wasn't he? The name felt like costume, like something he'd put on and called identity, but had no objective reality. He'd been a ranger. He'd had a life before this. But had he? Or was he just a pattern of neurons firing, a temporary configuration of matter that believed itself to be continuous and coherent when it was neither? Yes, the voice whispered from Madison's mouth, from Jim's, from the trees themselves. You're beginning to understand. Or rather, to ununderstand. To see how thin the walls are between categories, between human and animal, between solid stone and yielding clay, between yourself and us. Robert looked down at his hands. His fingers seemed too long. His nails darkened as he watched. When he touched his face, the skin felt wrong. Too loose, like clothing he could remove if he just found the seam. No. No. No, 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 no. He bit his tongue again, harder. Copper taste flooded his mouth. Pain was real. Blood was real. His body existed, and it was human. And facts were facts even if he couldn't currently articulate which facts were true. His truck. He could see it now, parked at the trailhead 50 yards ahead. Sanctuary. Escape. He staggered toward it, his legs moving strangely. Gait shifting between bipedal and something else. The keys were in his pocket. Keys opened doors. Doors led to inside, and inside was safety. And safety was distance from this place where reality had rules different from the rules he'd always known. Behind him, the transformed rangers followed at a casual pace. They didn't need to hurry. Where could he go? Every direction led deeper into the forest, into the territories they'd claimed, into the spaces between measurements where uncertainty lived. Robert reached the truck and fumbled with the keys. His fingers were definitely longer now. Nails, definitely claws, but he could still grip, still manipulate objects, still function. The door opened. He fell into the driver's seat, slammed the door, hit the locks. The rangers stood in a semicircle around the vehicle, watching with eyes that caught and held his headlights' illumination. More figures emerged from the forest behind them. All the search teams, all the volunteers, 14 people who'd been looking for Madison Garcia, and found something that had been looking for them. Robert turned the key. The engine caught, and for one impossible moment he thought he might escape. Then he looked in the rearview mirror and saw what was sitting in the back seat. It was him, Robert Fitzgerald, exactly as he'd looked that morning when he'd checked his reflection before heading out. Same receding hairline, same weathered face, same green eyes that held no unusual reflection. The thing smiled with his smile. "Or maybe this is you," it said in his voice. "And that's me driving. Can you tell the difference anymore, Robert? When did we switch? Was it when you bit your tongue? When you fell in the creek? Or maybe we switched before the search even started, and everything you remember from today is just me experiencing your life, trying on your certainty like a comfortable jacket." Robert's scream caught in his throat. He lunged for the door, but his hands couldn't work the lock, couldn't coordinate the simple mechanical process. Outside, the rangers pressed against the windows, leaving handprints that sank into the glass itself, the material yielding like flesh. The thing in the back seat leaned forward. Robert felt breath on his neck, his own breath, his own body heat, as if he were simultaneously in front and behind himself. "You wanted to solve the mystery," it whispered. "So here's the solution, Robert Fitzgerald. There is no Madison Garcia anymore. There's only what she became when her certainty dissolved. And there's no Robert Fitzgerald anymore either. Just patterns of thought that believe they're continuous when they're already transforming." He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. They were human hands. They were claws. They were both. They were neither. The distinction between categories collapsed, and with it, the last framework holding his identity together. The legend says we can only transform if we wear the skin of what we kill. The thing continued, but that's just one culture's interpretation. The truth is simpler. We wear the certainty of what we unmake. We put on your frameworks, your categories, your definitions. We become you by making you uncertain of ever having been. Through the windshield, Robert watched the rangers' human forms flicker, seen simultaneously from multiple angles at once, as if reality had decided to show him every possible state of their transformation at the same time. They were human. They were not. They had always been what they currently were. They had never been anything else. His radio crackled one final time. Through the static, Madison Garcia's voice, her real voice, the one from her permit interview. If anyone finds this, if anyone's listening, don't try to understand. Don't try to make sense of it. That's what they want. They feed on the moment when understanding fails. Just run. Just... The transmission cut to that wet clicking sound. Then silence. Robert Fitzgerald sat in his truck surrounded by things that had been search teams, looking at the thing wearing his face in the rearview mirror, and felt the last architectural supports of his analytical mind give way. He'd spent 15 years believing that sufficient observation and logical analysis could explain any phenomenon. He'd been catastrophically wrong. The door locks clicked open on their own. The rangers outside stepped back, creating a path into the forest. An invitation, a choice that wasn't really a choice because every option led to the same dissolution of boundaries, the same transformation from certainty to uncertainty, to whatever existed beyond both states. He could stay in the truck and slowly realize he'd already transformed, that the Robert Fitzgerald who thought he was taking refuge was just another iteration of the entity wearing borrowed certainty. Or he could walk into the forest and embrace the transformation consciously, trade his analytical framework for whatever terrible freedom the Rangers had found in letting their definitions collapse. Or there was a third option that his fracturing mind could barely articulate. Except that he would never understand this, that some phenomena existed beyond the reach of measurement and category, and that his survival depended on abandoning the very frameworks that had defined his entire life. Robert chose. He put the truck in reverse, closed his too long too human simultaneously, both and neither fingers around the steering wheel, and drove. Not toward explanations, not toward understanding. Just away as fast as physics, if physics still existed, if it had ever existed, would allow. The Rangers didn't pursue. They watched him go with expressions that might have been pity, or might have been amusement, or might have been something for which no human emotional category existed. His reflection in the mirror smiled at him. He smiled back, uncertain which of them was performing the action and which was merely reflecting it. The GPS showed coordinates that cycled between Tennessee and nowhere. His compass pointed in all directions simultaneously. The road ahead split into paths that existed and paths that didn't, and Robert Fitzgerald drove down all of them at once, his analytical mind finally accepting the one truth it had always denied. That measurement could fail, categories could collapse, and certainty itself was just another skin that something hungry might choose to wear. 3 weeks later, a ranger found his truck abandoned at the Klingman's Dome parking area. The keys were still in the ignition. The fuel tank was full. The mileage showed he'd driven 47,000 miles since leaving the trailhead, despite the GPS logs indicating he'd never left that precise coordinate. Inside the truck, they found his field notebook. The last entry, written in handwriting that became increasingly unrecognizable with each line, read, November 7, 2011, Madison Garcia case update. Insufficient data. All data is insufficient. Data itself is insufficient. I am insufficient. I am. Transformation complete at grid coordinate 35.633. The sentence ended there. The remaining pages showed boot prints pressed into paper that should have been flat, impressions that went through multiple pages despite nothing having been placed on top of them to create pressure. The prints measured 11 inches from heel to toe. Standard adult male, size 10 boot, Merrill hiking model, but the prints were pressed into the paper from both sides, as if someone had been standing on the notebook while simultaneously standing underneath it, existing in two spaces that shouldn't have been able to overlap. The search for Robert Fitzgerald lasted 4 days before being called off. No evidence of his location was ever found, though 17 hikers over the following year reported seeing a ranger in the Baker 7 grid area who asked for their names, measured their boot prints, and spoke about transformation and certainty in a voice that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The search for Madison Garcia was quietly closed. Her file joined 63 other cases of missing persons in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, whose disappearances defied logical explanation, whose evidence trails ended in impossibilities, whose final communications spoke of things that shouldn't exist but did anyway. And in the deep forests above 5,000 feet, where the laurel grows dense and the mist never quite lifts, rangers still report equipment malfunctions on November 7th of each year. Compasses spinning, GPS units showing coordinates that don't exist, and sometimes pressed impossibly deep into billion-year-old stone. Boot prints that shouldn't be there, size 10 Merrills and size 8 Merrills, and prints from boots that haven't been manufactured yet, all arranged in patterns that might be random or might be language, written by things that exist in the spaces where measurement fails and certainty dissolves into something with too many teeth and too few boundaries. The mountains remember. The mountains have always remembered. They were here before humans named them, and they'll be here after the last human name is forgotten. And in the gaps between the names, in the territories where categories collapse, something waits that feeds on certainty itself. Robert Fitzgerald understood that now, wherever he was, whatever he had become, however many spaces he occupied simultaneously, he understood it completely, and understanding, he finally knew, was just another form of hunger.